Come on. Oh!
Oh, yep. Oh, I missed a big one too. Look at the colour on this. It's like a black brim.
Yes! Oh, dropped it.
Oh, yep, got it. That was the second one too. Oh.
Yes! Oh, saw it come out. Oh, Jesus! Oh, did you see that? It's a beauty. He came screaming out. Oh, man, look at the size of this.
Yep. Oh, again.
Oh, it's a good one too.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, again, take it again.
Got it. Yes. Welcome back to my lure box. In this video, I'm going to take you through all the things that matter and some of the things that don't really matter when you're going skip casting for mangrove jack. I've got a little paddle tail soft plastic lure on, a weedless worm hook, and I'm running a bait casting setup today. And what I want to do is just help to bulk answer the questions that sort of come in about the gear and how to fish and how to skip in and that sort of thing, and get down to some of the detail on what you should really try and do and pay attention to so that your catch rate can go up. Chasing jacks is a hard game at the best of times, but this can make all the difference between, you know, maybe none or one fish and a handful. So I'm going to start off talking through the equipment, and then we'll get into some of the techniques and things like that, and hopefully just helps point you in the right direction or give you some things to consider when you're out chasing jacks next time. Or even if you're just wanting to get started on skip casting, what to pay attention to and how to spend your time and your money wisely so that, you know, you're making it as least frustrating as possible. Because it can be super frustrating, obviously, when you're really challenging yourself with your casting. Being able to get it right definitely takes practice, and that's one of the key things. So let's talk through some of the gear, and I'm just going to keep the camera rolling and keep going. Hopefully catch one while we're doing this. And but really just try and demonstrate to you how to do it and show you what I'm looking for as I'm going. But yeah, we'll talk equipment. So probably the most common question I get asked about jack fishing and skip casting is what reel and rod am I using? And to be dead honest with you, it doesn't really matter. There's a couple of things that I'll talk to you about that can help get your skip casting going, but in terms of bait casting reels, this is a 200 Shimano Corrado. This Inception by 13 Fishing, I use that as well. That's got like poly bearings. This has got, I have put ceramic bearings in them at times, but stainless bearings, and it doesn't really matter as long as it's not like a, you know, a plastic spooled bait caster that really slows up. You want to be sort of starting around that $180 range, I reckon, and anything above that, you're pretty right. You want to have a smooth drag on your bait casting reel as well. That's probably one thing that I do at times, is just jack my bait casting drag up using Carbon Tex, but that 13 Fishing reel, that's got a great drag already. These Corrados are fine. So as long as you're sort of buying a middle end to high end reel, you should be fine. Anything under $120 is probably going to be a bit cheap. And then the rod that you want is, this is a really light rod for what it is. It's a bass rate of 510, 3 to 6 kilo. You might be able to read that there, hopefully. And this is really, like it says, it's a bass rod, but I buy it and I love them because they load up like that. They're fairly soft top of the blank. So that does make the difference when you skip casting. You want to be able to load up the top of the rod. You can do it with a real stiff rod, but it just makes you room for error a lot less. Whereas with this thing, and the brakes off on my reel, I can really load up and fling it in really freely, and that just helps with your repeatability. So I spoke about the brakes really quickly. That's one of the things that really does play into it when you're getting your technique going. I'll show you quickly just the brake system on this Corrado so you know what I'm looking at. So in here you can see I've got one of the brakes out. So they're the brake systems. I've got one out. Usually I'll go with one or none, but if you're just starting, I suggest you go with about half the number of brakes that they've got. I'll show you this. This is another one of my skipping reels. This one's got like 6 dials on it. You might be able to see that there. And so I've ended up going to, number 1 or none on that. But if you start at 3 when you're getting into it, that's probably a good way to go. There's a couple of pointers for the reels and the rods. Don't get too caught up on buying a super expensive reel if you're just getting started. So my suggestion is 20 pound braid, 20 pound leader of whatever your rod length is. So if you have a look, this lure's at the ready. You can see that, ready to be skipped in about a foot from the tip of the rod, and there's my join there. So it's not down through the runner here that comes out, that feeds the line out. It's not going through there all the time. It's right there. So I can check it really quickly as I'm going to see it's in good nick, and it's the perfect casting distance away from the rod tip each time. I'm not winding it on. That's the gear. You can go heavier. I would prefer myself to go to 30 pound instead of down to 16, because you're fishing such tight stuff when you're skipping. They rip you straight back in, and I'd rather have that extra pound of insurance, that extra 10, than trying to go down in the sporting class and just getting owned. And I actually think it'll make your casting easier to get going with heavier line. So I use, on these reels, I've got, this is bionic braid, even though it's faded. It's gone the distance, and I use bionic braid on my reels because it's a little bit rough and tough. It's like an 8 weave, but that helps me just get better feel on the way in as I'm thumbing it. If you get a really slick, smooth line, it might come off super quick, but I tend to lose a bit of feel. So I love the feel of these braids, the bionic braid. It's just one of my favorites, and I think that helps with my repeatability and my accuracy, just judging distance, because I can feel it through my fingers. That's about it in terms of the equipment. You want little paddle tail soft plastics. Okay, this is a first cast. I think this is like a 4-inch. What have I got here? That's them, first cast, and it's about a 4-inch, I'd say, 3.5 to 4-inch little paddle tail plastic. But there's so many on the market, heaps that I've reviewed, that if you're not sure which lures to go for, just check out some of my skip casting videos, and there's loads of options in there. But essentially that's what you want, okay? And I just use a twist lock at the front. So the things that matter when you skip casting, aside from the gear, and I don't want to play up the type of gear that I've got too much, because it's more about your practice and what to look for when you're fishing it. A lightly weighted jig head, you can go with a regular jig head if you want, but you want to hide that hook or have it almost hidden in line with the bait, so that you're not getting snagged and your confidence to send it deep is right up there. So in terms of tactics, the things that matter, if I'm fishing in really windy conditions, I'll upsize my baits. So I might go to like a 5.5 inch size bait if it's windy and muddy, because the banks here around the mangroves, they get super dirty, and so that bigger presence, if it's windy or noisy and blowy and the tide's raging, I'll use a bigger plastic. But today it's actually fairly calm. I've just sort of come out of this main section and I've downsized to use something that's fairly natural looking and pretty small for a jack, I reckon. That's just the bite-sized lolly for a jack. So the size of the baits do matter. If you go down to like a 3-inch, you're probably going to be pulling a few brim and get more bycatch, and the jacks tend to respond, I reckon, better to a bigger bait, especially when it's a reaction bite in there tight. So I'd prefer a 5 and a 4 than a 3. And that just makes your skip casting better as well. So a big bait when you're getting started is a lot easier to skip. So I've been fishing with the 130 Doctors by Fuse, 5-inch and 4.5-inch flash arrow fish J shads, fish arrow flash J shads they are, not that smaller one. I've been fishing the bigger one. I've got to try these small 4-inch ones, but the 4.5's a favourite. So the size of your bait for your skipping when you get going, that really matters. Now, if you're wanting to get started and you haven't done any skipping before, I suggest you should use a spinning outfit first. And the reason for that is, really what you want to be doing, like if you watch my technique, I'm just shooting it along the rod tip, along the surface of the water. And if you haven't done that before with a bait casting setup, it's probably easier, maybe even out of a kayak because you're lower, to get down and skip along and just get that trajectory going with a spinning outfit. So I've always got spinning outfits in, but now that I'm used to it, I use a bait caster because my accuracy is better, and that would be, in my eyes, the #1 thing when you skip casting, is your casting accuracy. You want to get it deep into the honey holes where it's all shadows, and that's the key thing. So how do you do that? You've got to have an okay setup and a nice lightly weighted plastic so it can fizz in there, but it's practice. As much as it hurts, you can't hack it. It's got to be the hours on the water and the practice and the frustrating sessions to get going. And that is the thing that'll tick off the #1 thing that really matters with jack fishing and skip casting. So getting your skip casting accuracy going by practicing is the way to go. But the little things that come behind that are, a standard setup and just getting that practice of your rod just trajecting over the surface of the water and the release height and your timing and everything, so it's always getting in there. So my suggestion with that, to get your accuracy and to get the casting routine down, the way that I did it when I first started this, like watching on YouTube the guys in America, the bass pros, skipping around docks and things, and I sort of thought, well geez, it's going to work for jacks around cover. The way that I started to get into it was just put a couple of sessions to the side. I completely wrote them off for catching fish, and I just went out to work on my casting. And I enjoyed it so much, the skip casting element, the challenge of it, that it ended up becoming the way that I do a lot of sessions, is just working on my casting, and the fish come after that as a result of getting that process and that technique right. So if you can stand it, to just forget about the fish for a bit and to go out purely to try and develop your casting technique and your repeatability, I think that's a really good way to go. And that just sort of frees you up so you don't get super frustrated like a lot of people that try it do. Just get frustrated, they're not catching fish when they were planning on trying to get fish in the session the same as they were learning the skip cast, and then they get over it and they put the bait casting, skip casting stuff away, and they never crack it, and they never get to taste just the brilliant, exciting, effective fishing that comes on the back of learning this stuff. What I really wanted to do with this video was to try and shape that up for you so you can understand that, yeah, it's a challenge and it's going to take some time, but the rewards are 100% worthwhile. And I'm speaking from a fair bit of experience and from the frustration of not having, watched a lot of videos that really broke it down the way that I've tried to over the last few years. All right, so the rain's just starting to come down. I can see it getting on the screen, so I'm going to try and wrap this up. But what I want to do is just riff off a few of the things that really matter. So if you've hung around to the end of this video, I want to share some tips with you, the things that make a hell of a lot of difference. Dropping tide, mangrove roots, and that period of time where there's only about 1.5 meters, like horizontal wise, 1.5 meters of distance for the jacks to sit in. Any more and they're not going to get to your lure, okay, by the time you pull it back out. So about 1.5 meters to 2 meters of distance behind the front of the mangroves, and a dropping tide, the jacks sit on the edge and wait for the bait to come out, and that's their feeding time. So the bite times are the dropping tide out of a mangrove line bank. If you can get low light late afternoon, early morning, that's another one. And probably really, you're always looking for bait. That's in any tackle tip or fishing tip. But really what you're trying to do is get a low light that is the shadows. And after casting accuracy, I would say shadows are the next biggest tip I've got for you. That's number 2. So if you can get casting deep into the darker shadows, and then maybe like, you know, overhanging trees that jut out, like an extra bit of cover off the bank, now you're starting to, you know, get into the nitty-gritty of it, and you're starting to put those pieces together that really make the difference. If you've got mangroves and then you've got a fallen down log as well, that's what you want. The base of the log, burn it right back just under the bottom of the log, right back along that, and hang on. And yeah, there are a couple of the things that I really think will help point you in the right direction and get your skip casting going. You know, you want water temperature as well, so when you put your hand in, you want it to be cooking. You're like, it's not cold. And then your paddle tails, you want them to be fast moving from the moment they turn around and start getting retrieved back. Have a look at this first cast little paddle tail. It's so loose, that thing gets going the moment it hits the water. And I've even had them hit this on as it's heading into the snag. It's sort of flinging along, it hasn't stopped yet, and it gets stung on the way back in. Now, one of the other things to think about that I forgot to put in, and I'll add this into the video now, is your stealth is just so important. Because the fish are in such shallow water, don't worry about the depth. If you can fit a jack in it, like if it's 20 centimetres deep in there, that's fine. And I've had plenty of jacks that come from, you know, super shallow stuff that I cannot believe it's in there, but because it's so shallow, they're right up near the surface, they can hear everything. So ticking on the boat, bumping the motor, like punching the motor from 0 to 5 or 10 on your speed, that's enough to spook fish in these shallow conditions. So you really want to be super slow. I try to dance between 1/2 and 1 and rarely sort of move the motor and redirect it as I'm going. You want to be super quiet and give yourself some distance back as best as you can. As long as you're not compromising your casting accuracy. You know, I'm sort of a couple of rod lengths away here. That's too close. I'm right on top of them. They can see me already. So unless you're up in North Queensland where, you know, it's a lot different and the jacks are sitting in there, and it's a whole different ball game up there. Southeast Queensland, you want to be back and using every little thing that you can to try and get those fish to bite and to not be spooked back into the depths. So I'll move back about probably 15 metres back at least, I reckon, and I'm casting in front of the boat most of the time, or level, you know, trying to get it in front before I get there, before my shadow gets there. The other thing is as well, that the skip doesn't matter. Like, you don't need to be skip casting. If you can't skip cast but you can land it on a dime deep in there, you don't need to skip it in. Some days I reckon the skip might wake them up on the way in. It's a very natural, like as it flicks in, and you'll see prawns and bait doing that. So it's very natural as a presentation. But if you're just firing it in and getting that little thing moving the moment it hits the water, that's as good as anything. I just try to skip constantly to keep a routine, get my repeatability up. So, you know, when I do need it, I've just had 10 of the best practicing before that cast where it really matters and makes a difference to get deep into cover. So you don't have to be skip casting all the time. But like I said earlier, it's just good practice. And yeah, sometimes that's the thing that makes all the difference. And you know, I was talking to boys just yesterday at the ramp. You know, I more than doubled their catch rate, and these are good guys, good fishermen that were throwing lures just to the edges, not deep in. And I really think being able to penetrate deep into the snags and pull the jacks out of the cover makes all the difference. Especially on those tougher days. And those boys were like, yeah, really tough, hard day, slow, one hit. And yeah, I saw plenty of action myself from doing this, so really think it pays to get it down. Right, well, here comes the rain, and That's enough talking for me. I'm desperate to get into it now. I'm going to get a little bite window in here hopefully while this water's dropping, and hopefully I can get onto some fish. Thanks for watching. I hope that's helpful for you if you're looking to get into it. It's a lot of fun. I can't recommend this stuff highly enough for jack fishing and for barra and even bass and Saratoga even. It works on all of those. So yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think, or if there's something I've forgotten that you're still wondering about, put it in the questions in the comment section below, and I'll do my very best to get back to you, and I'll see you in the next video.